reboot the show, erase the old show, and reboot. So my internet has been a little spooky since we've had some lightning thunderstorms here in my area. So I'm just going to give you guys a couple of minutes to jump back on board again. We had a nice group going, so hopefully I didn't scare anybody away with my lousy internet connection. For those of you watching the replay, feel free to put replay in the comments section and any questions that you may have for me. After the show is closed, I always check back to see who leaves comments and questions so that I can help answer those questions in case you're not able to watch me live. So I see a couple of you joining back with me, and thank you again for your patience with my gremlins that like to live in my computer sometimes, and also with my internet connection. So I'm just gonna give you guys a couple minutes to jump on board. Let's try this again. Hey there, Linda, glad you could join me. All right, we got Richard. Yes, is it better? Good. Yay, good. I always love to hear that when I can actually like troubleshoot something and get it to work. All right, yeah, so much better. See, guys, it's amazing when you take a hammer to your router gets scared into behaving itself. Right? Okay, sound is okay, guys. I'm using my new microphone still. All right, hey there, Kimberly. Hey, comadre, glad you could join in. Glad to see you. All right, guys, I'm going to give you guys like another minute because I know there were several people. We had a big crowd on board this evening and we lost it because of my internet connection. So hopefully I'm just going to give you guys a little bit more time to jump on board. I do want to say thank you to those of you who've been sending me questions this week. That's what this show is for. So if you do have any questions, you can email me directly there. And if you would like to start receiving alerts, I'll put that number in a little bit later when I've got more people on board. All right. You can email me there your questions and I answer them all myself. It might take me a couple of days, but I do get to answering all of your questions. All right. So Emily's got her prosthetic appointment on Friday. Fingers crossed. I know you are so excited about getting that first prosthesis and getting to work there. Yes, Mark, we're having our typical Florida summer weather storms, and Tampa, Florida has the dubious honor of being the lightning capital of the world. And we really do live up to that name. It was funny. I was having a meeting today with a potential sponsor for next year. More about that later. And lightning just like in my area and the internet connection went kablooey. And for me, I'm used to that. So I just, wait for a couple of minutes, jump back on board. And as I'm explaining this to the person I'm talking to, they're just like horrified that that's just like a normal thing for lightning just to knock things out in our area. And I'm like, yep, that's how we roll here in Tampa, Florida. And that's how we do it. All right, guys. So tonight it is a general Q&A session. Hey there, Harsh. Glad you could. Okay, good. So glad it's better. It's a general Q&A session, guys. So don't be shy. Put your questions in the comments section and I will be answering them. I'm going to answer first the ones that people send in beforehand, and then I'll get to the ones over here. Right? I know. It's like, woohoo, lightning capital of the world. All right. All right, guys. Let me go ahead and get started. So it looks like most of you have jumped back on board again. So for those of you joining me for the first time, again, this evening, welcome. My name is Cosi. I'm a physical therapist, amputee specialist here in the lightning capital of the world, Tampa, Florida. I've been a PT now for a little over 20 years, and my passion is working with the limb loss community. All right, guys. So like I said, today was a general free-for-all question session for the physical therapist. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with Emily's questions. Emily asks, what is an elective or voluntary amputation? I've heard it mentioned in the Amputee Coalition support group, but not quite sure what they mean. I made the decision to amputate my foot and ankle after getting osteomyelitis and concerns about the infection getting worse or becoming septic. They didn't force it on me, but I wouldn't call it voluntary or elective either. I feel like it was a matter of life or possible death at that point. Yeah, and that's kind of like the distinction there. It's basically like if it's an elective, it means that the patient said, yes, please amputate my leg. I am making a conscious decision to have this elective surgery versus, no, I'm going to go ahead and wait and see if this situation can resolve, right? So what are situations that tend to lead to an elective amputation that sometimes doesn't feel like an elective amputation? So Emily's case is a really good case where she had osteomyelitis and the infection was getting worse. And I'm sure the doctors were throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the infection, and it wasn't showing signs of improvement. Okay. And also they were probably looking to see if the tissue was starting to become necrotic or die off, or if the circulation was being affected in her leg. Right. So at that point, technically they can say, well, we can technically keep trying to treat you, but chances are this will lead to sepsis, which will lead to death. Okay. So that's when the patient hopefully says, yes, go ahead and let me sign the papers for the amputation. So technically that's called elective because they technically gave you a choice. Now, in cases where it's not elective is when the patient is not able to give their verbal approval. So our traumatic accidents, our motorcycle accidents, our car accidents, our boating accidents, where the patient is just not either conscious or the patient is not in a state of mind where they can give their consent, but the doctors know that they have to amputate to save the person's life. So then the wording might be just a little bit different there. So I love this name. I don't think I've ever seen this person on board. He's titled the Redneck Researcher. I'm sure there's a great story behind that one. Welcome aboard. So an enthusiastic amputation procedure. Yes, although I will say most of my patients were probably not very enthusiastic about having it done. But again, it's one of those things where, when it comes to amputations and limb salvage, doctors obviously try to give the patients as many options as possible and to lay out the scenario as best as they can. And I actually think I've had more folks tell me that they elected to have that amputation, that they didn't wait until that last minute to see if they could save it. So that's there about that. Yeah, not much of a choice. And it sounds weird to tell people, yes, I had an elective amputation. Oh, you chose to have your leg cut off? Yeah, no, not really. That's not what I really wanted. So yeah, the wording can be just a little strange. It's more of just like, you just explain to people, well, it was either having my leg amputated or possibility of dying from sepsis. And let people decide, well, that's not really elective, is it? So anyways, semantics at that point. Okay, so here's another really good question. Emily asks, is there a hierarchy or anything in how prosthetists choose what kind of socket they build for a person? When I was first casted, I told my prosthetist about my spina bifida and lymphedema. We started out with a fixed socket with no adjustability, but are finding that due to my lymphedema, getting a good fit is a challenge. Due to the fluctuation in leg volume, my prosthetist and I have now talked about an adjustable socket. Had I known about adjustability before I was casted, I would have addressed it with my prosthetist, but it didn't learn about it until I saw your talk that I had already been casted. It's frustrating because I would have thought since my prosthetist knew about lymphedema that they would have built the adjustability in from the start and not done a fixed socket first. Do most prosthetists try fixed sockets with no adjustability first, and then if there's an issue, move on to something like adjustability or other things? Or is it a matter of what insurance will cover and deem necessary? I wish I had known more about my options before I was casted to try to avoid all the refittings and possible changes. So, this is probably the number one reason I created this show and why I continue to do this show. When it comes to being an amputee, you're a patient, but you're also a consumer. Okay. You have to be able to advocate yourself from a clinical and a health standpoint, but also from a product standpoint, because a prosthesis is a product that you and your insurance are purchasing. Right. And as a new amputee, I know it's overwhelming because you have so many things that you're trying to adjust to, that you're trying to learn about. And then on top of that, you're being talked to about this complicated componentry that is also very, very expensive, right? So it's natural to rely upon your prosthetist, and you should be able to rely upon your prosthetist and your physical therapist, okay, to give you the different options and to talk you through the process of what happens when you are having a socket and a prosthesis made, okay? Now, I'm playing a little bit of Monday morning quarterback here. Okay, I don't know this particular prosthetist, so I don't know what was going through his or her brain at the time that they were fitting Emily for her socket. But if a patient came to my office and said that they had a history of lymphedema, okay, the spina bifida, not so much, but a history of lymphedema, then yeah, the first thing that would pop into my mind is this person is going to need adjustability in their socket. Why? Because their limb is going to fluctuate in volume so much more than your average amputee without lymphedema. Okay. Now, why is it that the prosthetist didn't think to do this from the get-go? I don't know. I don't know their reasoning. I know some prosthetists are still learning about adjustable socket technology. There's a couple of different vehicles out there that are available. The two main ones that I hear about are Martin Bionics adjustable socket, and then the Revo Fit socket, which is my poster child for adjustable socket technology on this show. They are sponsors of mine, and they're sponsors of mine because I really love their product and I really love how they can build adjustability into the socket. I will say that the prosthetists that are well versed in the Revo Fit socket, a lot of them do tend to put their patients do tend to build the adjustability into the first sockets. Okay, these sockets can adjust up to 10 ply before you have to add any socks, right? So that's quite a bit right there. And for new amputees, those first 2 years where your limb is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and changing shape, having adjustability in the socket can help those sockets last a little bit longer for you. Okay. So yes, I can't speak for that prosthetist. But yes, for lymphedema, I would have expected that adjustability would have come into their mind. Now, this is where this show comes into play, guys. Okay. Not all prosthetists are going to know about this particular adjustable socket. Not all of them are going to be familiar with construction. Okay. But there's nowhere in the rule book that it says that you cannot bring this information to them. That's how these folks came on my show in the first place, was because many of you as viewers were hearing about the Click Medical Revo Fit adjustable socket, and many of you were asking me questions about it. I didn't know about it, so I approached the company, and that's how I was able to learn more and more about this socket. Okay. Patients do that for me all the time, and viewers do that for me all the time, where they bring me some of the new technology they're hearing about, and it makes me go out and learn more about it. Okay. So most clinicians are fairly good eggs, right? And they like to continue to learn. So there's nothing to say that you can't bring this to your prosthetist, whether it's about adjustable socket, whether it's about asking about the new hoopy scoopy prosthetic foot or the new knee that's out on the market, just to open up that conversation with your prosthetist to see if you're a candidate for that new fill in the blank. Okay. Hang on. Ooh, lots of comments came in. Okay. So going back to the previous question, Emily said, I said, I don't want to lose my foot and ankle, but I don't want to die either. Yeah. So we went ahead and did the amputation. And that's essentially, that's sometimes what it boils down to. I think probably the most amazing case of this life or death situation with the amputation is this beautiful woman. She lives in Virginia. I met her when I was giving a talk in Virginia. She's a bilateral below the knee amputee. An incredibly active woman, wife, mother, grandmother. And I believe when she was 79, 80, she became septic. And I'm fuzzy on the details as to what led to the sepsis. But basically the sepsis was causing the tissue in her legs to die. And at 80 years old, the surgeon basically said to her, okay, this infection will kill you. You have the option of amputating both legs, understanding that you will have to, go through some pretty intense recovery at the age of 80 to do this. And she said, I'm not done living life yet. So she had the bilateral below the knee amputation, and she's just an amazing woman. She's golfing. She is walking around beautifully. She participates in clinic, very active young woman. So it's just one of those cases where you see an elective amputation in a very dire case, and just had the most amazing outcome. Let's see. Jesse says, my choice was to live. My knee replacement was bad from the beginning back in 2004. In September of 2022, I had no choice and thankfully didn't turn sepsis throughout my whole body, and I was hours away. Yeah. I've heard of many cases like that. Let's see. We've got Sean. Theo says he learned about adjustable sockets through Cosi talks. Yes, I'm so glad to hear that, guys. And guys, it really puts a smile on my face when one of you sends me an email and you say, hey, I was able to have this great conversation with my prosthetist because of something that I heard about on your show. Whether or not you end up going with that particular product or going down that route, for me, I'm just happy that I gave you information that you were able to have a conversation with your prosthetist and just get to learn more. That's the goal. Let's see. Felicia says, I'm moving to Varos by Autobach. Okay. Jane says, ooh, here's a good one. There's my GI Jane right there. If the prosthetist wants one socket, and as a good researcher, you want another socket, who wins? Now, as a very diplomatic person, I'm supposed to say it's not a win or lose scenario, but we'll put that aside, right? Guys, at the end of the day, you're the one who has to wake up with this leg every day, right? So the decision of this final socket, it really does need to be a team effort. So when you're at an impasse like this, first of all, you need to ask your prosthetist why. Okay, why is it that they don't want to use this particular socket that you've researched and that you feel you're a good candidate for? Okay, if they cannot give you a good explanation, an explanation that makes you go, oh, I get it now. Okay. Or if they give you an explanation of, well, your insurance won't cover it, then I would say it's time to look at a second opinion. Okay. And that's it. And I recommend this all the time, guys. There is nothing wrong with getting a second opinion. Okay. 9 times out of 10, your prosthetist has wonderful experience. They're familiar with certain products. They're familiar with cases that might be very similar to yours and to what componentry will work best for you and the goals that you want to be able to accomplish with this prosthesis. Okay. So it's on you, right, to communicate those needs to the prosthetist. You need to communicate to them why it is that you want this particular socket. What is it that this socket you feel is going to let you do? You have, okay? What is it that you reached your full functional mobility potential, right? And then ask them why. And guys, occasionally I do write this advice and they'll go back to their prosthetist and their prosthetist doesn't really have a great explanation. Or the explanation might be something like, well, I've never worked with that particular piece of technology. And that's okay, guys. That's okay. I'm not saying it's a bad prosthetist. It just means they may not be familiar with that particular piece of technology. Okay. When it comes to the adjustable sockets, I always tell people, well, they can go to the Click Medical website and they've got a Click Academy where they walk prosthetists through how to construct the sockets, and they get all the education there for continuing education credits. Okay. But yes, if it comes to the point where you feel like you're not being heard by your prosthetist and you feel like the prosthetist is not communicating well with you, then it's time to maybe get that second opinion. Okay. And it could be that that second opinion has a fresh outlook and might say, yes, in fact, that would be a good idea for you. Or that second opinion might just be better at explaining why that might not be a good idea for you. Okay. But yeah, do your homework, squeak the wheel, get those answers. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be the one with that leg day in and day out. Okay. Sean says, my prosthetist hasn't even responded when I dropped off the Click Medical information about an adjustable socket. And again, guys, I can't answer for prosthetists. I don't know, if it's a very busy prosthetist and they're just so overloaded with work that they don't have time to look at some of these materials that you might send them. But again, just grab a second opinion. Mark says, you think it makes sense in a first socket? Yeah, and a lot of people are really coming around. Even when I first started learning about Click Medical a couple of years ago, I would say, well, maybe you should have a check socket first and then put the adjustability in. Now I'm just like, no, I love having the adjustability in from the beginning. It makes it so much less frustrating for patients when they're learning how to adjust volume. And especially now that I have it around here somewhere. Can't find it. Now that they have the new Click Reel where you can just make micro adjustments, which I really like that feature. Okay, so Felicia says, unfortunately, RevoFit hasn't given me enough adjustability, but it was good for the initial take home. And again, guys, it's not a one size fit all. And believe me, I do not take it personally if you guys are like, that product that you recommended, not so much. It's not meant to work for everybody. But again, just having these conversations and having that information available to you. My foot and ankles, my life, trying to save. It hasn't been easy, but I'm not a woe is me kind of person. I roll with it and I refuse not to live my life to the fullest. My husband, son, and village have been amazing, and that makes all the difference. And Denise, you've been watching the show for several years, and it was a pleasure getting to meet you in person. And I've always loved your attitude. Let's see. Tio Rue says, I actually educated my prosthetist about the Revo Fit. I really hope Click Medical is listening in right now. And I appreciate all this feedback, guys. I really do. Jesse says, adjustable sockets. Really? I need to talk to the prosthetist. He picked out a socket and that was that. I knew nothing. I didn't know what to ask. Okay, so I'm going to give you, Jesse, here we go. Hang on, guys. Bear with me. Okay, Jesse, I just posted the link to my YouTube channel, but it's super easy to find me. All you have to do is just type in Cosi Talks. I have a lot of videos on a lot of stuff, but if you go to the 2-minute chat section, okay, you're going to find one on adjustable sockets, and I give you the rundown on how the adjustable socket works. But here's the quick and dirty on it, all right? I happen to like the Revo Fit adjustable socket, and it's made by a company called Click Medical. And actually, let's just go ahead and keep showing Click Medical some love. I'm just going to put their aha. So there's the Click Medical website. Okay. So here's how it works. Your prosthetist will make the socket, right? And they will order the Revo Fit kit, right? So in this neat little box is all of the equipment that you need to build the adjustability into the socket. Does that make sense? Okay. So they can build the adjustability in by putting a gap in there and tightening, putting the cords there to tighten it. Or they can do panels like this one. And then they can do something called a hinge design where it opens up like that. This particular demo model doesn't have it. And then you use, this one has a BOA dial. They have a new click reel that adjusts forward to tighten and backwards to loosen a little bit. And you just turn the wheel and it tightens up, okay, and loosens up. Okay, so some of the quick benefits of having an adjustable socket, for me, I think the thing that patients love the most is in the morning when their limb is a little bit more swollen and they're having to do the hop, skip dance, the amputee dance to get into the socket. So when you have an adjustable socket like this one, you just open it up to one of the larger settings and you can just go in and then tighten it up as needed. And then as your day goes on, especially if you live in Florida where you're constantly sweating, right? And your limb shrinks throughout the day, okay? Then it can adjust. You don't have to take off the whole entire socket. You just have to, and that's it. And it is adjustable through clothing. And actually, like I said, this is one of their older models. Their newer model is even more low profile, so it doesn't stick out quite as much. And it's still adjustable through the clothing. Like you still crank the wheel there. Okay. So that's like the quick and dirty of adjustable sockets. There are other companies out there. Martin Bionics is the other big one that does adjustable socket technology, but I'll be very upfront. I am not as familiar with the Martin Bionics. I think they call it the socketless socket, I believe is what it's called. So. Let's see. Sorry, guys. I'm like, you guys had so many wonderful comments come in that I want to make sure I don't miss any. So yeah, Jesse, hopefully you can go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. If you don't mind, guys, this is my shameless plug moment where I ask people to follow me on Instagram, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just helps overall keep the show moving. So if you're on my YouTube channel, guys, make sure you hit subscribe. Thank you. Kelly says, I had some fit issues. 2 PT sessions wasted on problem solving. Yes, I hate it when that happens. The PT thinks the prosthesis is too long and the socket needs to be slightly rotated, causing me not to want to put all my weight into it. Yeah. And again, this is the part for me where when I have patients, I really try hard to see if I can schedule my patient visits at the prosthetist office. The nature of my practice, I can do that because I don't accept insurance. I'm a cash-based practice. So it means I can practice pretty much out of anywhere I want. So if I have a new patient, and especially if it's a prosthetist that I'm not as familiar with their work, I try to do the first couple of sessions in the prosthetist office. And that way, if there's any issues with the socket, prosthetist is right there and we can troubleshoot right away. And it just makes life easier for everybody all around. It takes the frustration from the patient of having to waste a PT session, right? The prosthetist is grateful because they're just like, oh, that's a quick little fix. We can just fix it right there. Or, oh yeah, that's a new problem. We need to figure that out and troubleshoot it. With the prosthesis being too long, yeah. And there's, yeah. And the socket needs to be slightly rotated. So it could be, Kelly, and again, I don't, this is me playing Monday morning quarterback. It could be that your liner was not put on properly. Sometimes if your liner is not put on just right, especially for my above the knee amputees, if the liner is rotated, it's going to cause sometimes the socket itself not to be on properly, especially if you're using a lanyard or if you're using a pin lock. So just those little things that when you're trying to put the leg on and it's not fitting quite right, those are things you might want to do to troubleshoot. Jim asks, will adjustable sockets work with all types of attachment? And by attachment, I'm assuming you mean suspension systems, such as lanyard. Vacuum is not considered to be a suspension system. I've been corrected several times on this one. But yes, the adjustable socket, and we're actually having a huge show. Mark this one on your calendars, guys, on August 9th. Okay. The guy who created, the prosthetist who created this particular adjustable socket technology, his name is Joe Mahan. Really cool guy. He's been on the show before. He's going to be back on the show on August 9th, and we're going to talk about suspension systems, including they have a suspension system. But yes, this design is made to work with pin lock, suction suspension, and you can put elevated vacuum into it, all that kind of fun stuff. So yes, it does. Jane says, thank you. In my case, the military is my source. And he said for the AK, he normally puts new folks and suction, the BK with a suction suspension. Again, everyone's just a little different. The AK, I can certainly see why you want suction suspension because it just kind of gets on there a lot easier. BK, I feel like I see more options done. Some people go with the pin lock at first or lanyard at first, and then they progress to a suction system. Some people end up going with an elevated vacuum to give them extra suspension, but not primary suspension. But we're going to do, like I said, guys, we're doing a whole show on suspension systems, and there's a lot to cover there. Okay, let's see what else we got. My pleasure, Jesse. So Sean says his prosthetist was very negative when, he mentioned about the adjustable socket. And again, guys, that second opinion, just grab a second opinion. Denise says, I am thankful that I have a prosthetist that will discuss anything in detail with me. He said I have to be comfortable enough to tell him if something is not working for me or communicate any concerns. Ding, 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 ding. And that's how it works, folks. Yeah, Kelly says 2 PT sessions wasted on problem solving. Prosthetic may be too long and socket needs to be rotated. Yeah. And back when I worked in insurance-based clinics or hospital where I was working with insurance, it was so frustrating to me when I spent an entire PT session just trying to figure out what was going wrong with the prosthesis. And just having to waste that session. Nothing is more frustrating to a physical therapist than when that happens. Yeah, because as good as we are at gait training, if the prosthesis is not fitting properly, if that socket is not comfortable, then it doesn't matter what rabbits we have in our hat, we're not going to be able to make it work. Yeah, it's frustrating. Sean says, as of late, I've been getting a new leg about every 5 years, and now it's time for a new leg. So Sean, maybe it's time again. Just ask a different opinion. Felicia asks, I think you've talked about this before, but is it possible to tone an above the knee limb? Yes and no. And yes, I've discussed this, but I certainly don't mind repeating myself because, guys, there's a lot of folks that are new to the show, watching the show for the first time, and they may not have heard these answers. And also, repetition is the mother of memory. Sometimes the more times you hear things explained, the more better understanding you'll have. Okay, so when it comes to the muscles of the residual limb, will they ever be as toned or as strong as they were before the amputation? No. Okay. And it's a simple matter of mechanics and physics. The human body is just physics in motion. It's made up of levers and pulleys and moment and ground reaction forces and all that kind of fun, nerdy physics stuff that I love. Right. So basically, when you amputate the limb, right, the muscles are cut. And not only are they cut, they're attached in a different way than what they were intended to be. Okay. So that's going to reduce the efficiency of the muscular contraction. Okay. So will that muscle still be able to contract? Yes. Unless there was some kind of nerve damage. Yes. The muscle will be able to contract, but it just will not be able to do a full sized contraction because it doesn't have the length and the way it's attached. It's not the way it was before. Now, there are some surgical techniques that are coming out, and honestly, I got to get myself read up on those surgical techniques where they are trying to place these muscle groups in a more anatomically favorable attachment places so that they can contract a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently. But again, I got to go read up on those surgeries. Okay. Now, does that mean that you don't bother trying to strengthen those muscles? No. Okay. So for someone who's an above the knee amputee, okay, obviously their quads and their hamstrings, those thigh muscles, have been cut. Okay. I'm still going to do exercises on those muscles. I'm still going to try to isolate those muscle groups and get some contraction out of them. Now, if I have someone who has a really, really, really tiny residual above the knee limb, I'm not going to spend as much time. I'm going to focus more of my time on their glutes. Okay. But the funny thing is as you're doing some of these body exercises where you're focusing on the glutes, you're still recruiting the muscle fibers in the residual limb. Okay. Same thing with my below the knee amputees. A lot of below the knee amputees want to work their calves. They want to work their gastrocs and soleus. Those are the meaty calf muscles behind your leg, right? So, we might do some exercises where we isolate those muscles, but usually I find I get the best activation of those muscles when we're doing whole body closed chain exercises like squats or lunges. Does that make sense? Okay. Sean says, I believe an adjustable socket would let me last longer than 5 years. It very well could, Sean, but also it might make just your day-to-day life a little bit easier, especially if you're someone who has to take your leg on and off several times a day to add or take off socks. That part right there. Oh, Tio, you are so sweet. He says, amputees, be your own advocates after watching Cosi talks. I appreciate that. Oh, no, and G.I. Jane, in their defense, they did send me a new socket. So Click Medical's on the ball. I'm the one who's dropping the ball tonight. I have the older model, which is still a really great model. Many of you have this particular setup. And they sent me the new Click Reel. And it's somewhere in this room. So y'all don't know, those of you who are new to watching the show, I have 4 beautiful children. And my studio here is also the music room where kids practice piano. And I have my office. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this room. And sometimes my kids like to play around with the sockets and things that are in here. Don't tell Click Medical. Shh. Okay, let's see. Emily says, I'm meeting with a physiatrist specializing in amputees on the 11th. A rep from Hanger will be there and I'll probably be picking their brain. Yes. Pick their brain. Guys, don't be shy about asking questions. I mean, this is your body. This is the rest of your life with this body. So whenever you find someone who's an expert in the field or a new ear, pick their brains. Absolutely. Patricia says, I've had a BOA dial socket for my first socket. I've had the same socket for 3 years as long as I've been an amputee. I'm getting ready for a new socket and new prosthesis. My prosthetist said he did not think I needed the adjustable socket as he felt my residual limb is stable in size. I told him I wanted the adjustable socket. What do you think? I don't use the BOA a lot, but definitely use it some. Okay. And again, Patricia, usually so long and short of it, for the first I used to say 1 year, but I've actually extended this up to the first 1.5 to 2 years after amputation. Your limb is like up and down in limb volume. Okay. It's recovering from surgery. It's managing edema. It is remodeling those muscles that have been transected and the atrophy that's occurring with those muscles, right? So limbs changing shape. That being said, okay, the majority of amputees that I know, this is no fancy research. This is just me and 20 years of experience. The majority of amputees I know still experience limb volume fluctuation for the rest of their lives. It may not be as dramatic as those first 2 years, right? But they still experience limb volume changes and limb changes, which makes sense, guys. Our bodies aren't static, right? Our bodies change a little bit every day. And as we get older, things continue to change, right? I've talked to some amputees who are 30 years out of their amputation. They're saying, yeah, my limb looks different now than what it did 10 years ago. Okay. Now, Are there the occasional unicorns that I find that they have super stable limbs, meaning their limb looks the same in the morning as it does when they go to bed at night? Yes. And they have a liner. They don't even wear socks. They just wear a liner and their socket and off they go. But that's a very, very, very small percentage. And Patricia, in your case, it boils down to what are you comfortable with? You are obviously an experienced amputee. You've already had experience with this boadial socket. Okay, maybe you don't have a very dramatic fluctuating limb, but for you, for the times you do have to adjust and you don't want to have to take off your leg, get the boadial, get it done. And actually, Patricia, I'm going to take it a step further. Ask them to look into the click reel. That's the new version that they have. And it goes, like I said, it has a micro adjustment. So just so you see the difference. Okay, when you are tightening on the boadial, right, you pop it in, twist, 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 and it's all nice and tight. When you want to release it, you pop it out and it fully releases, okay? Now with the new click reel that they have, if you tighten, but let's just say you want to loosen it just a smidgen, then all you have to do is turn it the other way just a little bit, and it'll make that micro adjustment for you without having to release it and then retighten it. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So, I mean, those of you who have been using the boadial, y'all love it and it's great. But for those of you who are looking at a new socket and you're looking at getting a replacement, then I'd say be worth looking at the click reel and asking about that. Mark, he says, will you come to my next prosthetic appointment here in South Florida? Mark, I know your prosthetist and I know he's good. You don't need my help. He's a good one. He's a good prosthetist. I'll just go just because I want to see you. All right. Thomas says, if your walking causes you to work out a knee flexion contracture, straighter leg means that the prosthesis will feel longer. Think of that as sort of success. So again, yes, Thomas, and that was going back to a question, and maybe I missed something where Kelly mentioned that she had a knee flexion contracture. Maybe I didn't catch that part. But yes, if Kelly, if you started out your physical therapy session and your prosthesis was fit for you when you had a knee flexion contracture, then yes, physical therapy usually helps with that, right? And as you straighten it out, the leg is going to appear longer, okay? Other things that might make a leg feel like it's longer is if you have too many socks on there. And sometimes physical therapists will be guilty of that ourselves when we're trying to get that fit right, and we'll just be like, put another sock on. All right, put another sock on and put another. And then before we know it, we've lifted our patient entirely out of the socket, right? Making their prosthesis too long, okay? So those are some other troubleshooting things that you can think about, Kelly. Okay, lots of comments, guys, and thank you. And guys, by the way, if I do miss your question, which it happens sometimes, that's my email. That's my direct email, cosi@cositalks.com. Guys, the whole show is for you guys to get your questions answered. So if I miss your question, email me, okay? And if I don't respond to you in at least 2 days, you email me again and say, hello, Cosi, I emailed you. Okay, all right, let's see what else. Let's get back to these questions. Okay, Emily asks, can you explain lock and pin versus suction versus vacuum? I don't know what all that means and when it comes to the prosthesis. So Emily, especially for you, I want you to put this on your calendar, August 9th. What you're talking about are suspension systems. And this is something that even as a clinician in my early years, I was like, I had trouble understanding. And a lot of my patients will confuse shape of socket and type of socket with suspension system. And sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap, which can explain the confusion. Okay. So the shape of your socket, you know, how it's shaped is exactly that. Okay. Now there may be some features on the shape of your socket that help hold it on. And I don't have a below the knee that I can show that. I need some new toys, man. If there's any prosthetists out there and y'all have any old sockets that you want to send my way, totally serious, email me please, because I'm always looking for demo sockets so that I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. So if any of my prosthetists are out there, and all of you prosthetists, I know you have that secret closet in the back of your clinic that has all the old equipment that's gathering dust. That's where I steal a lot of my sockets from. Okay. Please dig through those. And if you have any demo sockets, send them my way. Anyways, So when it comes to suspension system, that describes how the socket is being held onto your leg, how it's being suspended there. Okay. So pin lock, it's not lock and pin, it's pin lock. Okay. You'll have a liner and it has a little pin on the end of it. And in the inside of your socket, there's a little hole. So the pin clicks into the little hole and that holds the socket onto your leg. Okay. And then you have things like suction, where it's like a negative pressure. Okay. Think of like those little Chinese finger puppets where you stick your finger in each end and then your finger, like you can't pull your fingers out. That's kind of how a suction socket works. And it's like it just kind of provides the complete total contact with your leg, and it pushes sometimes through a little valve. It'll push all the air out of the socket, creating a negative vacuum in the socket. Okay. And then vacuum, technically, it's not supposed to be billed as a suspension system. I've been corrected. It's supposed to act as a limb volume stabilizer, but it has the added bonus of providing a little bit of extra suspension in there. Okay. Jesse asks, how do you know if a liner is put on correctly? Yes, and it's one of those like guess and check scenarios, Jesse. A lot of times, especially with my above the knee amputees, like my prosthetists that I really love to work with, they'll mark the liner, and they'll find like a freckle on the patient's leg, and they'll tell the patient, okay, match the mark with the freckle on your leg, and then you'll have a good starting point. Okay, sometimes it's guess and check. So if you have a pin lock where your liner has that little pin sticking out the end, then it has to be positioned ideally at the center of the bottom of your limb. Okay. And that way it'll go directly into the hole in the socket and go in there. You'll know right away if it's not in the right place, and you have to take it off all the way and put it back on to adjust. So with the pin locks, yeah, you'll know right away. When it comes to like the seal-in liners, the ones that have that little rubber seal around it, again, it's a feel thing. You know, you'll put it on and you'll put your socket on and realize, wait a second, something doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. And you have to rotate the socket and then you put it on. And it's just, a lot of it is just trial and error and practice. By the end of the sessions, usually after 1 or 2 sessions, my patients, because they've done it so many times, they're just like, oh, I didn't put the liner on wrong. I didn't put the liner on the correct way. Take it off, roll it back on, and off they go. Okay. And you also learn when it feels off, that if it's due to the liner being rotated. It's a feel thing. I know again, this is something that your prosthetist should be working with you, and your physical therapist should also be working with you to help you learn the correct donning procedures. Okay. Sean, keep me posted on how things go for you there. I'd really love to know how it ends up. Jane says, I've conducted research into the profession of prosthetists. They are certified and accredited, and they should be familiar with most products, in my opinion. Yes and no. I mean, there's thousands of products out there on the market, thousands. And Jane, even with all of the work that I do working with all the different companies, and I feel like, okay, I've got a pretty decent grasp at a lot of the big names. I tell you what, I'm learning about new products all the time. Okay. And same thing with prosthetists. They're learning, for me, what establishes a good prosthetist in terms of componentry is not that they know every single bit of piece out there, but that they're willing to continue learning, and that they find something that they don't know about, that they go and they learn about it. That to me is more of a mark of a good, good prosthetist there. Linda, just glad you're here. Ha! G.I. Jane is having you do some push-ups there. All right. Let's see. Oh, Kimberly says my grandma would have loved an adjustable socket. All right. I will be checking my emails. Yeah. Mark says 4 years and still getting limb fluctuations. And again, guys, especially those of you who have underlying medical conditions, high blood pressure, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, lymphedema, right? Your limb, it's going to affect your limb and the limb volume on a day-to-day basis. Jeff, man, glad you're here for the party. Jeffrey, I got to tell you something. Like, I'm just like a little side thing here. So Jeffrey is the head of the amputee peer and support group, one of the largest amputee Facebook support groups on Facebook. And Jeff, if you want to throw up the name of the support group there, feel free to. And then he also has the Amputee Jokes and Fun Facebook page. It's hilarious, Jeffrey. I like scroll through that on a daily basis, and some of them I have to scroll past them, but others I just die laughing. So thank you for that, Jeffrey. So Susan says, or if you get the elevated vacuum suspension, you don't need to add and remove socks all day. I have one and I love it. And yes, and when it comes to vacuums, elevated vacuum systems, I'm always just very careful. It's not meant for everyone. And I'll just say there, we'll talk more about it at a later date. It is not meant for everyone. And there's some people who absolutely love it, and some people that it's just an extra component added onto your socket, something else that you have that could potentially, break down, and they prefer not to have to mess with it. Good, Patricia. Let me know how it turns out. Tom is one of those unicorns. He says, my residual limb is the same size in the morning as it is when I take it down off when I go to bed. And that's a lot of part because you're an athlete. So with athletes, again, because they're constantly moving, and their limb volume will stay a bit more stable. All right, G.I. Jane, I'll check out that email a little bit later. Okay, sorry guys, scrolling. Hang on, there was one of these. Woohoo! I wanted to answer this question. This person says, Emily was saying, not necessarily related to my amputation, but do you know of any exercises to strengthen the pelvic floor? I have a neurogenic bladder, and I feel like my muscles need strengthening to avoid leaking in between intermittent cathing, and it may be more diligent with a catching schedule. Sometimes the urge comes on suddenly, and I don't always make it. Okay. So guys, I've spoken in the past about pelvic floor dysfunction, and this is probably one of the few, in my career, I've been able to kind of treat patients in almost every single specialty available in physical therapy, except pelvic floor. The reason being is because pelvic floor specialty is something that really exploded in my profession in the past, I would say 10 to 15 years. So 20 plus years ago when I was in school, it was basically a footnote in our education, which is a disservice to us as clinicians, I feel. So what am I talking about when I talk about pelvic floor dysfunction? It's basically where your body meets the saddle. So when you sit on a horse, the part of your body that is touching the horse is your pelvic floor. And it was funny. I had a guy once, he said, well, that's a woman's problem. I go, no, Sarling, you've got a pelvic floor too. So it's also a male problem as well. Is it more prevalent in women? Yes, because we have babies, right? So that can add the stress to it. But women who have not had babies can also experience pelvic floor dysfunction, and men also can experience pelvic floor dysfunction. Okay. So what does that mean? So basically, if you take a look at Bob here, we'll use this Bob, right? The pelvic floor is located right here, right? And as you can see, it's kind of a big hole right there. Like it's a hole, right? So everything underneath there, what consists of your pelvic floor, it consists of ligaments and muscles. Okay, so think of it like a hammock, right? It's not supported by bone structures, like not by bone, right? It's just, right? That's it. Okay, so if you don't have a bone supporting it, like a skeletal structure supporting it, those muscles over the course of time can weaken, can sag, and can cause prolapses, meaning it can cause organs to actually start coming out of the body sometimes. Okay, and there's a lot of things that will contribute to this. When it comes to amputees, okay, especially with my women, the stress that is put on the pelvic floor increases. Okay, why? Because you're using that much more effort to walk. Okay, so if you're using so much effort to walk, right, then that pelvic floor is going to carry the stress of that. And if that pelvic floor is not strong and tight, right, then things are going to start to leak and you're going to have problems. And again, this can happen to men and it can happen to women. And it's very, it's very embarrassing for many people to talk about. And I've had some patients who've been comfortable enough to come and ask me about it because they weren't sure what was going on. Or then, they were relieved to know that, yes, this in fact is an issue and that it's also very treatable. Okay. So, if this is something that you feel like you're experiencing, whether it's incontinence, stress incontinence, pain, especially pain during intercourse for women, When you sneeze, you know that something leaks out. Okay. These are all signs and symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction. And it is kind of on my to-do list to bring one of my colleagues onto the show that are pelvic floor specialists. So usually what I recommend people is if you think you have a pelvic floor dysfunction, Google pelvic floor physical therapist in my area, and you will get a lot of responses, thankfully. Like 15 years ago, you couldn't find anybody. Now there's like 10 under every rock, which is good. Okay. And the wonderful thing about pelvic floor therapists, guys, they are not only knowledgeable about pelvic floor, but they are so good at tracing the problem. Okay. Sometimes what starts in the pelvic floor is not really a pelvic floor problem. It's a weakness somewhere in the core muscles that's causing more stress on the pelvic floor. Okay. It could be a problem up in the spine somewhere. But the pelvic floor specialists are really good about tracing this down and addressing the root of the problem, and with treatments, really resolving a lot of these issues. And guys, those of you who experience issues with pelvic floor, whether it's bladder incontinence or even bowel incontinence, you know how much that affects your quality of life. I've had some patients that they couldn't even leave their homes because of this problem. And going to see a pelvic floor therapist helps them be able to get back into their communities again. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Emily says, can you send the link page for the jokes page? I have a quirky sense of humor. I'll give you the warning, Emily. There's some salty humor on there, but if you can just you just scroll past the really salty ones, they got some really funny stuff on there. Not for kids though. Definitely not for kids. All right. Thanks for posting that, Jeffrey. All right. Let's see. We got time. We got time for one more. Ooh, okay. Theo Rue, I hope you're still on board. I got your question right here, man. He asks, can running blades be used for daily use instead of a regular prosthetic foot? Nope, cannot. A couple reasons why. So the running blade, think of it like a pogo stick. Remember those pogo sticks that you used to jump on, right? Or I was never able to coordinate one of those. But anyways, with the pogo stick, in order to get the energy out of it, you had to really bounce into it. Like you had to put your full body weight into it to get yourself to go back up again. So a running blade is kind of sort of like that, right? You have to be able to really put your weight into it in order to get that push back. Okay. So you got to put the potential energy into it to get the kinetic energy. Remember that old science experiment, right? To get the energy out of it. So when you're walking, first of all, when you're running, you're putting about 8 to 10 times your body weight into your joints, right? So that running blade is definitely getting enough weight to spring that. When you're walking, you're not putting as much weight as when you're running. So it's kind of like walking on a brick. It'll be like thud, thud, thud. And you can even hear it. Like whenever I go running with some of my amputees, when we're running, right, that blade sounds nice and rubbery and juicy. And it's just like, right? But then when they're walking, once they've stopped running, it's just like thud, 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 right? It's not bouncing in there. And that can cause a lot of problems traveling up the spine and in the pelvis. The second part of it is a lot of times with my runners, their prosthesis has to be set longer than their anatomical leg because of that pogo stick effect. Okay. So if you think about it, if they're running on the blade compresses, right? When they put weight into it, and then it releases that compression when they take the weight off. So when it's compressing, it's almost like it's shorter, right? It's shortening, and it makes the person run lopsided. So the prosthetist has to set the running blade a little bit longer, right? So that when it compresses, it doesn't feel shorter than the anatomical leg. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, I've actually seen one guy, and he was at the grocery store. This was a few years back. Young guy, you could tell he was very fit and very muscular, and he was walking around with his running blade. So of course, me being nosy, I have to go introduce myself and say, "Hey, this is who I am. What do I do? This is what I do. Do you mind if I ask you about your running blade?" I go, "Did you just come from the gym?" And he goes, "No, I wear this all the time." And I'm like, "And you don't get back pain?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "Okay, more power to you." He was the only person I've ever met that wears the running blade around as his regular foot. So I'm sure there's a couple people out there who do that, but it's not what it's meant for. Not what it's meant for. All right. Jeffrey, thank you so much for putting that out there. Oh, I love that, Emily. That's awesome. You know what, Jeffrey, you know what you need to start? You need to start a Facebook page on amputee t-shirts, because man, I have never seen so many funny shirts as the ones that amputees have on Facebook support groups. It is so funny. All right, guys, this was a really good show. And thank you guys for being patient with me as I was trying to troubleshoot all of my problems with the technology. Guys, if you guys can do me a huge problem, a huge problem. Oh my gosh, I need to go to bed. If you guys can do me a huge favor, I am trying to increase in my email subscribers. I don't spam people with emails. The emails I send out, I like to think they're actually kind of fun to read and they have good information on it. So guys, if you have not, and I just realized I wrote the wrong website. If you have not already signed up for my email subscriptions, go to my main website, cositalks.com. Scroll to the bottom and you can sign up for my emails there. Okay. You also get the scoop on giveaways when I have sponsored giveaways. Those are the first people that get first pick at that. So it's kind of cool to be a part of that. All right, guys. Next week, I knew I was going to do it this week, but the 4th of July kind of threw things off. Next week, we're going to be talking about hip flexion. So keep your eyes peeled on my social media channels, because I'm going to be asking questions and I love it when you guys participate in the questions. So we'll talk about hip flexor tightness and contractures next week. All right, guys, as always, thank you for letting me be a part of your lives this evening. And I will see you guys next week. Same bat time, same bat.